I wanted to talk about sexual urges and sex. And I wanted to try and understand how we are supposed to deal with sexual desires in a modern context. And the reason why it's difficult to judge this based on what Bhagwan has, might have said about desires and senses in general, is that he operated in a certain cultural context. He operated in a certain time in South Asia when marriage was a thing that was inevitable. Everyone had to get married at a certain age, more or less, unless it was your destiny to not be. And so this question didn't come up too much. But in the modern world, marriage is not an option for everyone. So how should we proceed with our own biological needs? Because sex is also different from other senses in a way, because there is a biological imperative, but there is a mental component to it. There is that, desire-driven mental gymnastics that need to be done in the modern world to be in relationships, to be with someone. How do we go about either controlling this desire or shaping it in a way that it doesn't completely consume our lives, and it doesn't, how should I put this? It doesn't get in the way of trying to detach from the body. Is celibacy an option in this world? I'm sure it is, yes. I mean, if you're sincere in your devotion, if you have a certain quest, one can be celibate, but there is also the mental part of it where you keep, opportunities present themselves, so you think about it. So yes. What is a good way of approaching this problem in the modern world?
Okay, let's leave aside the sexual urge for a moment. Just let's consider a parallel biological desire. We all have desire for food. We know we need to eat a certain amount every day, and the food needs to be of a certain quality in order to nourish this body. But see how much people think about food, how many different types of foods are available, how many programs are on television about cooking, and people are interested in the foods of different cultures. It's a huge part of human culture is food. What sort of food you eat, going out to eat, and all that is all we need is a certain quantity of food each day to nourish our body. But we think so much about it unnecessarily. All that is required is simply to eat some food. But it becomes such a people want tasty food, and different people have different tastes, and it becomes a huge cultural thing. It is similar with sex. Sex it's a biological urge. It's a biological urge not for the survival of this organism, but for the survival of the species. Whereas the urge for food is for sustaining the life in this particular body. The urge for sex is for sustaining the life of the species. So we have a particularly strong desire for sex that it's hardwired into us. That is, so long as we identify ourselves as a body, almost everyone has this desire, and for most people it's a very strong desire. It is said that there are some people who are asexual, who have no particular sexual desire, but that is a little bit unusual. Most of us have strong sexual desire. in most cases, it is because the biological function of sex is reproduction. For most of us, that sexual desire is in the form of desire for the opposite sex. Sadhuam used to illustrate this with an analogy. He said, if you have a magnetic bar, one end is North Pole, one end is South Pole. So if you're at the North Pole of the magnet will be attracted to the South Pole of another magnet, and will be repelled by the North Pole of another magnet. So if we take this magnet, one side is male, one side is female. Most of us identify with one side of the magnet, so we are attracted to the opposite. Even in the case where people have homosexual desire, it's all to do with identification, what we identify ourselves with. I'm not saying that we have freedom to choose. If we are born heterosexual, we can't just choose to be homosexual. If we're born homosexual, we can't choose to be heterosexual. It's just like the body has certain characteristics, male or female. The mind or emotions also can identify either as male or female, or whatever it is. All these are very complicated because it's all to do with identification, and we are not this body. But anyway, for most of us, we are attracted to the opposite sex. That is just like the magnet. So what Sadhuam used to say is, in that magnet, if you move one way or the other from the center of the magnet, there will be magnetic attraction. The only place in the magnet where there is no attraction at all is in the center. If you in the very center of the magnet, it's midway between the north and south, so it's a neutral point. The center is the heart. If we want to remain free of sexual attraction, we have to be the heart. We have to be as we actually are. If we rise as ego, leaving the heart, we identify either as male or female, and we feel this sexual attraction. It is inevitable. We can, if you want to be free of sexual attraction, the only effective way is to annihilate ego. For some people, celibacy may be a good option, but it's not necessarily the best option for everyone. And there are some people who choose to be celibate for spiritual reasons. If they are suited to that, that's a very good, very nice, pure way of living. But most of us, that's not necessarily the most suitable thing. So the prarabdha will be shaped accordingly. If it's our prarabdha to be celibate, that is because that is suited to, well, it's not always the case. Sometimes people it's their destiny to be celibate, but they still don't have control over mind. So their mind is still dwelling on these things. The real problem, there is, just like there's nothing wrong per se with eating, we putting food in our mouth. There's nothing wrong per se with going to the answering the calls of nature. These are all biological functions. In exactly the same way, there's nothing wrong with the sexual act. The main problem from a spiritual point of view is the desire, because this is a very strong desire. So what is the best way to deal with this desire? For some people, as I say, celibacy may be a good option, but not for everyone. So if we are not living a celibate life, as you say, in a traditional society, marriage is the norm. And if you get married to someone in many societies, once you're married, you're married. There's no, it could be maybe a disastrous marriage. Maybe the couple don't get on well at all together. Maybe one is very cruel to the other or whatever. But once you're married, you're married. You can't get out of it in many societies. In our society, in a modern Western society, it is, though we get married, when the marriage doesn't work out, we have the option of divorce, which is not an option in many societies. the reason why marriage is recommended, it's one way of helping people to curb that desire. So that's fine in a traditional society. Today, we don't live in such a traditional society. Things are a bit more complicated, a bit more messy nowadays. So what is the appropriate thing nowadays? Ultimately, it's all according to destiny. Whatever happens is according to destiny. So it's not possible. It's very easy to lay down do's and don'ts. Religions are great at this. Religions are great at saying, do this, don't do that. But that often doesn't work well. So we don't live in a society where the morality is so prescribed. But still, the most important moral principle in all forms of spirituality, yoga, bhakti, jnana, but generally in most Indian Indian systems of spirituality, in Buddhism, in Jainism, particularly in Jainism, it's very strong, Buddhism, in Hinduism, the main thing is ahimsa. Ahimsa means not harming. It's often translated nowadays as non-violence, but actually, himsa doesn't mean violence, himsa means harm. So it's a bit, it's better to understand it in the correct sense that ahimsa means harm. So that is the best moral principle to guide us. If we are going to act, we should act in a way that doesn't cause harm to anyone, either to others or even to ourselves. There are certain things we can do that we may think are good for us, but they're causing us harm. So if we take ahimsa as our guiding principle, then, for example, one of the reasons why religions and social norms lay down things like marriage and so on is there can be two consenting adults can engage in a sexual act, but often that produces a third one, produces a child. So we have to consider the consequences of our actions. So because we don't live in a society where the moral norms are imposed upon us, we have to observe our own, we have to live a moral life as best we can. But when it comes to morality, to ethics, it's always a very complicated thing, because it's often very difficult to know what is the best course of action. Often we are faced with, in life, with what in English we would call a moral dilemma. In Indian languages, it's called dharma sangadam, where it's not clear sometimes we're faced with two options. Both options are potentially harmful. So we have to choose which is the least harmful. So life is a messy business. It's not always clear how we should act, but Bhagavan's teachings are not. Why Bhagavan didn't talk much about morality? Bhagavan is not so much concerned about action. Bhagavan is concerned about being. Because so long as we rise as ego, we inevitably get caught up in action. Because the nature of ego, that, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, he describes ego as a formless phantom, a formless demon. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. It's a phantom or demon because it's got no substance of its own. It borrows its substance from Satchit, it borrows its form from the body. So without grasping a form as I, the ego has no separate existence. That is, bereft of this body identification, ego is formless. Formless means it has no separate existence. So ego comes into existence grasping form. That is from the beginning of the verse, he said, grasping form, it comes into existence. The form he's referring to there is the form of a body, but it takes as I. Grasping form, it stands. Because without experiencing ourselves as I, ego cannot stand for a moment. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. That is, having identified ourselves with the form of this body, then we are constantly feeding on other forms. We're constantly attending to things other than ourselves. And here forms means not just physical forms. Anything, any phenomenon is a form. Anything that can be in any way be distinguished from any other thing is a form. So the mind is constantly dwelling on forms and feeding on forms, he says. Urupatri undu. Undu means feeding. So the food on which ego lives is grasping form, means attending to things other than itself. Uruvittu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. So the very nature of ego is to grasp form. That means since ego is formless, whatever form it grasps is something other than itself. So the nature of ego is to always grasp things other than itself. In other words, to always be attending to things other than itself. But if instead of trying to grasp other things, if ego tries to grasp itself, to find out who am I, if it turns its attention back towards itself to see who am I, what happens? Bhagavan says in the next sentence of that verse, Tedinal otam pidicum. If sought, it takes flight. So if ego tries to know its own reality, it subsides and dissolves back into its source, is the implication. So the very nature of ego is grasping things other than itself. So because ego cannot survive for a moment without grasping other things, it has very strong inclination to grasp things other than itself. But other things are what Bhagavan refers to in that verse as uru, form, is what is also referred to as vishaya. Vishaya means objects or phenomena. Anything other than ourself is a vishaya. So the nature, ego has a very strong inclination to constantly grasp vishayas. The inclination to grasp vishayas is what is called vishaya vasana. But the vasanas are not ego, but it is the nature of ego to have vishaya vasanas. So, sorry, I'm just trying to remember how I was, why I was saying this.
The question was pertaining.
Yeah, I know what the question was. I'm just trying to remember connection. There was a reason I was coming to this point. Sorry, but there was a good reason, but I was.
So I mean, if you remember it later, you can let me know. But I think that you pretty much answered my question, and I like this approach of looking at it as doing no harm to anyone.
Yes.
Because the truth is that in modern society, to have sex, there's a lot of manipulation that needs to be done of another human being, and you need to see that person in a certain way, in terms of what they can do for you. And you do objectify them in order to achieve that. So if we approach it from that perspective,
and even when it is said between two consenting adults, there may be two consenting adults, but as you say, there's often manipulation there. People seek to gain something from other people in some way or other. So it's a very, very, there's no simple answer to these sort of questions. What is a right action? What is wrong action? It's often life is very, very, very complicated, very messy. So I know what I was saying. I was saying about the desire. The real problem is that is the problem with the act is we have to consider the moral consequences of it. But we shouldn't be causing harm to anyone else. That is very, very important, not only with regard to this, with regard to all our actions. We should try to act in a way that does not harm others. Insofar as we're still rising and acting under the sway of our vasanas, we need to try to act in a way that causes least harm to others. But the real problem lies in the desire. And among all, we have numerous kinds of Vishaya vasanas, but one Vishaya vasana that is particularly strong is this inclination toward for sexual gratification. This is there. It's, as I say, it's hardwired into us as biological organisms. So, how best to deal with this? Whether for some people, celibacy may be the best option, but not necessarily for everyone, because some people can try and live a celibate life, but the more they try to live a celibate life, the more their mind is dwelling on that. Chadwick has recorded one thing. I don't know how accurate this is, but Chadwick says that Bhagavan said this in his presence, but it may have been, I don't know, Chadwick didn't know a lot of Tamil, so whether he understood what Bhagavan was saying or someone translated it for him, but it was in the context of someone obviously who was troubled by sexual desire, and Bhagavan said, it's better to do it than to think about it. What the context was, we don't know. That could have been Bhagavan's advice to a married person, we don't know. But whatever it was, the main point is often more harm is done by dwelling on these things than actually than the act itself. So what is the best option for us? Ultimately, it comes down to prarabdha, because everything we are to experience in this life, as Bhagavan said, what is never to happen is not going to happen however much you try. What is to happen will not stop however much you try to avoid it. So ultimately, how many times we have to our sexual desire is to be gratified, and in what way it's to be gratified, that's all determined by prarabdha. So ultimately, that is, Bhagavan has given us we need to understand the greatness of what the solution that Bhagavan has given us. Bhagavan's solution to all problems is self-investigation. And self-investigation, of course, entails surrender, because to the extent to which we investigate ourselves, to that extent we're surrendering ourselves. Because when we come to action, what is the correct action, how we should act, it's often impossible to say what is the correct action. But Bhagavan's concern is not with doing, but with being. That is, Bhagavan is trying to turn our attention away from all these external things. Actions are external to ourselves, back towards ourselves, to the being. Without being, there couldn't be any doing. But there can be being without doing. As we know from every night in sleep, we just are. We're not doing anything. We're not knowing anything. We are just being as we are and knowing ourselves as we are. But as soon as we rise as ego, we get caught up in this action because of the vasanas. The vasanas get us, tie us up in this. They make us kriti mahodado patana karanam. When Bhagavan says in the Sanskrit version of verse 2 of Upanishasaram, he says the cause for falling in the great ocean of action, but he doesn't specify in Sanskrit what that cause is. In Tamil, he makes it clear what is the cause. He says vittai, as seeds. The seeds are the vasanas. In fact, in the Malayalam version, he says vasanakara vittai, as seeds in the form of vasanas. So it's vasanas that make us fall in the ocean of action. So, but all that we are doing is a play of our vasanas, and all that we are experiencing is the fruit of what we have done under the play of our vasanas. So long as we identify ourselves as this body, there will be sexual attraction there. There will be an inclination to think of it, let the mind dwell on these things, there will be an inclination to gratify this desire. This is just the nature of things if we take ourselves to be a body. The solution is to give up taking ourselves to be a body, to cease rising as ego and thereby identifying ourselves as a body. So why Bhagavan emphasized self-investigation above everything else. Self-investigation means holding on to our own being. To the extent to which we hold on to our being, we thereby subside and remain as being. And that is the only solution to all problems. If we don't attend to ourselves, then we are caught up in this endless cycle of samsara, birth and death and action and so on and so forth, and right action, wrong action, and the consequences of right action, of wrong action, and the moral dilemmas as what is right action, what is wrong action. All these problems arise if we allow our attention to go away from ourselves. So the Bhagavan's solution is, don't allow your attention to go away from yourself. Turn your attention back towards yourself as much as possible. Because we don't yet have sufficient love to attend to ourselves all the time, we allow our mind to come outwards, we experience ourselves as a body, we therefore experience sexual attraction, and we want gratification of this sexual desire and everything. All this embodied existence, samsara, is a messy business. The wise thing is to extricate ourselves from this as much as possible by clinging to self-attentiveness.